a homeless girl who draws people's pain, a billionaire haunted by the past, and a portrait that reveals a terrifying truth. His dead wife had a child, and that child is her. But how? Why was she abandoned? And who paid the price for the lie? Discover the shocking truth behind The Girl Who Drew Dreams. Subscribe to Forbidden Folktale, where every secret bleeds. The streets of Lagos Island sang in their usual discordant melody, horns blaring in symphony, traders shouting prices in multiple tongues, the scent of roasted plantain mingling with car exhaust, and the pulse of human ambition rumbling through cracked pavements. Amid it all, a small figure sat on a flattened carton near a pepper seller's stall in Idimota Market. Her feet were dusty, her hands stained charcoal gray. Her name was Eniola. She was 11, with eyes too old for her age, wide, still, and always watching. Her skin, a smooth dark chocolate, glistened under the Lagos heat. Her hair was knotted into untamed coils, a soft halo around her small face. She didn't speak much. Some thought she was mute. But her silence wasn't born of inability. It was the shield she wore in a world too loud. In her lap sat a stack of old torn papers, some salvaged from the trash, others donated by a sympathetic vendor. With a stick of charcoal or a stub of a colored pencil, she drew people, but not how they looked. Eniola drew people as they felt. A woman who stopped to buy peppers caught sight of a portrait Eniola was sketching. It was of the woman herself, but in the picture her eyes were red, her face lined with a grief she hadn't shown in years. "Wetin be dis?" she asked, staring. Eniola merely looked up. Tears welled in the woman's eyes. This looked like when my husband die. How you know?" Eniola said nothing. She just gently handed the drawing over. More people came. Some laughed, thinking it was a trick, but when they looked closer, when they really looked, they felt seen in a way they couldn't explain. Some left the portraits behind. Others paid her, small notes, a bottle of malt, sometimes a cara. Word of the Dream Girl artist spread from Marina to CMS through whispers in bus parks and mothers gossiping over pots of soup. Meanwhile, on the 14th floor of the Falana Tech Tower, Chief Tunde Falana stood behind a tinted glass wall overlooking the city he helped digitize. He was a man carved by elegance and silence. At 47, Tunde wore his grief like a well-tailored agbada, visible only to those who understood the folds of his spirit. His skin was a deep espresso tone, always clean-shaven, his head bald and shining like polished onyx. His eyes, almond-shaped and sharp, rarely showed emotion. Since his wife, Ifeoma, passed away 6 years ago, he had buried himself in work, tech infrastructure, clean energy, and now an AI fund for startups. But his mansion in Banana Island remained dim, its grand piano untouched, the garden weeds taller than the roses Ifeoma once planted. On this particular Saturday, Tunde had ventured out with little fanfare, ditching the usual convoy for a quiet ride in his bulletproof SUV. He had an early meeting near Balagan Market. Traffic was thick as usual, and the SUV slowed near a row of stalls. That's when he saw it. A small girl seated near the curb, surrounded by scattered sketches. One flapped in the breeze and landed by his window. The driver, unsure, picked it up and handed it to him. Tunde's breath caught. The face, the eyes, the birthmark. It was Ifeoma. She was smiling softly in the drawing, her head tilted the exact way she did when teasing him. And there, just behind her ear, the crescent moon birthmark no one could have imagined. Tundi's heartbeat quickened. He threw open the door and stepped into the street, startling both driver and passers-by. He walked straight toward the girl, who didn't flinch. She stared up at him as if she'd known he was coming. Where did you see this woman?" Tundi asked, his voice barely steady, holding out the sketch. Eniola looked at the drawing, then at him. She tilted her head slightly, confused, then simply shrugged. Did you know her? Her name was Ifoma Falana, my wife." Eniola remained still. "She died years ago." A pause. Then she extended her hand, not to shake his, but to gently take back the drawing, fold it, and hand it to him like a gift. The market's noise returned. Tundi stood frozen. The driver called his name. Someone recognized him and started filming. He looked once more at the girl, then turned to go. But he took the drawing. That night, in the quiet of his mansion, he poured himself a drink. The sketch sat on his desk, illuminated by the soft glow of his desk lamp. The lines were impossibly delicate, as though drawn by someone who knew not just Ifoma's face, but her spirit. He couldn't sleep. The next morning, he ordered his head of security to find out everything about the girl. A team was dispatched, discreetly. No cameras, no attention. "She's known as Eniola," the report came back 2 days later. "No known parents, lives behind the market stalls, sometimes sleeps in the back of an abandoned danfo. Doesn't go to school. Locals say she's been around for about 3 years. No fixed guardian." Tunde stared at the report. "And she just draws people?" "Yes, sir. They say her drawings are strange, that she can see things no one tells her." He leaned back in his chair. The weight of his past pressed down on him. Was this some spiritual message, or something more? He sent an envelope to the girl. Inside, 100,000 nairos and a note. "Draw me again. Anything you feel." It was unsigned. The following week, a driver returned with a new drawing. This time, it was not Ifeoma. It was a woman kneeling beside a small white casket, her face shattered in grief, her hands raised in the air, pleading with the heavens. The woman's face was unfamiliar to him, but the emotion, it was heartbreak, raw and untamed. And in the background, almost missed unless one looked closely, was a hospital window. The name written faintly, St. Anne's Maternity Hospital. Tunde felt a chill. That was where Ifeoma gave birth. He doubled the surveillance. Eniola didn't seem to notice. She kept drawing, capturing a boy whose father left, a woman who had lost her shop in a fire, an elderly man clutching a photo of a young soldier. Each drawing found its way back to the person who needed it, even if they didn't know they did. Tunde, in the shadows, watched her heal strangers while he himself felt more broken with every sketch. He couldn't sleep. His dreams became filled with flashes of Ifeoma smiling, of a baby he held once, just once, before the child supposedly died from respiratory failure. A thought crept in, one he'd buried for years. What if the child didn't die? What if Ifeoma was right to scream when they took her baby away, accusing the nurse of hiding something? The memory returned vividly now. Ifeoma in that hospital bed, wild-eyed, holding on to the swaddled child, screaming, "This isn't my baby!" Tunde had begged her to calm down, had blamed the trauma, the blood loss, the grief. 3 days later, the baby was dead. 6 months later, so was Ifeoma. Her heart simply stopped. Now, a street girl with soulful eyes and Ifeoma's mouth was drawing things no one should know. And one of those things was a grieving woman beside a baby's casket in that hospital. He picked up the portrait and stared at it, heart pounding. "Who are you, Eniola? What have you come to awaken?" Tunde Falana stood at the window of his private study, watching as the security gate rolled open. The small figure that stepped into the compound looked even smaller against the marble opulence of the mansion. Eniola's feet crunched softly on the gravel, her wide eyes drinking in the towering palms, glass walls, and distant glint of a water fountain she could barely believe was real. She didn't smile. She never did. But her eyes widened, not with fear, only curiosity. Tunde met her halfway, dressed in a simple white senator wear, no agbada, no rings, no mask. "You're welcome here," he said gently. She nodded once. He told the press it was a commission, a community art project, a gifted street artist being sponsored by the Falana Foundation to explore trauma and healing through visual storytelling. But that was just the headline. The truth was far heavier, stranger. Tunde had invited Eniola into his home because since she came into his life, he'd begun to feel again, slowly, frighteningly. And more than that, he needed answers, even if they tore open old wounds. The guest room was hers now. A studio was prepared beside it. White walls, endless drawing tools, natural light spilling from high windows. Eniola didn't ask questions. She simply walked to the paper, touched a charcoal pencil, and began to draw. Her first sketch in the house was of a girl, herself, but younger, curled in a cloth beside a blazing kerosene lamp, tears rolling silently from her eyes. On the wall behind her, shadows of adults arguing, hands flung in rage. The housekeeper, an elderly woman named Mama Aisha, saw the portrait and sat down on the floor in tears. That's my childhood," she whispered. "I never told anyone." Eniola offered no comfort, no words. But she gave the drawing to Mama Aisha. From that moment, strange things began to happen. Tunde noticed the air shift. The halls, once heavy with silence and loss, felt lighter. Doors creaked less. Sunlight lingered longer. His sleep, long plagued with cold dreams and images of Ifoma's lifeless body, began to change. Now he dreamed of her, laughing, alive, cradling a child whose face was blurred, then slowly clearing. It was Eniola. One evening, 2 weeks into her stay, Tunde entered the studio to find Eniola hunched over a new sketch, brow furrowed in intense concentration. He approached slowly. "What are you drawing?" She moved aside. It was a family portrait. 3 figures, Ifoma, himself, and a baby, wide-eyed, full-lipped, with the exact shape of Eniola's face. Tunde felt the ground tilt beneath him. The likeness was uncanny, not imagined, not generic. And the way Ifoma cradled the baby, tender, joyful, as though this were the child she had always longed for. "Where did this come from?" he whispered. Eniola said nothing. She merely tapped her own chest. Tunde backed away, his throat dry. He needed answers. Later that week, he took Eniola to Ifoma's hometown in Enugu, under the guise of introducing her to her late wife's artistic roots. Ifoma had painted once, back when they were just lovers, before tech and titles. Her first solo exhibition had been in this village. He thought perhaps returning there would stir memories or awaken truths. They arrived on a warm afternoon. The village was quiet, its red soil dry and cracked from lack of rain. Children ran barefoot past the old chapel, giggling as they eyed the tinted SUV. Tunde and Eniola walked through the market. An old woman selling yams looked up and gasped. "Ah, Yazoo," she whispered, dropping her knife. It was Mama Oluchi, the midwife who had assisted Ifoma's pregnancy many years ago. She stared at Eniola as though seeing a ghost. She is back," the woman murmured. "Who?" Tunde asked. "Ifoma. No, it's not her, but this girl. She looks like her, like a mirror." The villagers gathered. People whispered. One elder said what others had thought but didn't dare say. "Na Ifoma pikin be this. This is Ifoma's child." Tunde didn't speak. He couldn't. He simply turned away, his heart pounding like a war drum. The baby had died. He'd buried her. But now... Back in Lagos, his private investigator received a command: dig into the hospital records at St. Anne's Maternity Hospital 11 years back. A week later, they uncovered a name he'd almost forgotten: Nurse Gladys Bako, the night shift supervisor during Ifoma's delivery. The hospital had closed down 6 years ago. Too many malpractice cases, not enough funding. Gladys had disappeared shortly after. But she was found in a remote village near Abeokuta, living alone in a weather-beaten bungalow, surrounded by chickens and silence. Tunde drove down himself, unannounced, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Eniola wasn't with him. He had to face this alone. She opened the door slowly. Her face was gaunt, the skin sagging, eyes hollow like a woman carrying more than age. Chief Falana, she breathed, stepping back. You remember me, he said. I remember everything. They sat across from each other in the dim room. A single photograph hung on the wall, a baby in a pink cloth, her face blurred with time. He pointed to it. Is that her? Gladys didn't answer at first. Then, that's my niece's daughter. She paused, eyes burning. She died 3 months after she was born. Tunde leaned forward. But that's not the baby you handed to us, is it? Gladys broke. Her sobs shook the wooden walls. She knelt before him, shaking her head violently. I was wrong. I was wrong. Tell me what you did, he said, voice cracking. Gladys, between sobs, spilled the story. Her niece, barely 18, had given birth to a child with a rare terminal lung disease. The doctors said she wouldn't live past 6 months. That same night, Ifoma Falana gave birth. Healthy baby girl, perfect weight, strong cry. Gladys made a choice. My niece was broken. That child was all she had. I thought Ifoma was rich. She would have other children. She'd survive. But my niece, she had nothing. So she switched the tags, gave the Falana baby to her niece, gave the dying child to Ifoma, and watched as the lie spiraled beyond anything she imagined. I thought I was giving someone hope, but I gave everyone death, she whispered. Tunde said nothing. Tears filled his eyes, but none fell. He stood slowly, leaving her sobbing on the ground. He drove back to Lagos in silence, but everything had changed. That night, he stood outside Eniola's room. She was asleep, curled on the massive bed like a comma. One hand clutched around a drawing of a woman's face surrounded by broken chains. He walked in quietly, sat beside her, and wept for the first time in 11 years, not because of loss, but because he had found what he didn't even know he'd lost: his daughter. The next morning, he called a family meeting. Mama Aisha, the house manager, the guards, the chef. He sat them down. I want you all to know, he said, that Eniola is not a guest. She is my child, my daughter, and she belongs here. Eniola, standing at the stairwell, heard him. She didn't move, but for the first time her eyes softened, her lips parted, and she smiled, just a little. Tunde Falana sat at the far edge of the garden, watching his daughter from a distance. Daughter. The word still felt foreign on his tongue, like a prayer long forgotten and only now remembered. 11 years of absence could not be mended in a day. He had found her, yes. He had brought her home. But building a bond with Eniola was like trying to hold water in his hands. She kept slipping through, always quiet, always observing, her eyes ancient, carrying knowledge beyond her years. Eniola, too, was struggling. Her new world shimmered with beauty, comfort, and safety, yet it frightened her. Soft beds, warm meals, and servants who bowed when she walked past. It all felt like a painting she wasn't supposed to be in. The streets had shaped her. Silence had protected her. Now she was surrounded by people who called her Miss Eniola, and a man who spoke like her father but didn't feel like family yet. Her dreams grew more vivid with each passing night. She saw her mother now, Ifeoma, not as a ghost but as memory, rocking her as a baby, laughing, painting in the sun, crying alone at night. Eniola would wake up drenched in sweat, sometimes in tears. Then she'd reach for her sketch pad and she'd draw. One by one, the walls of the mansion began to change. Tunde's study, once stiff with the scent of old books and grief, now bore a canvas of Ifeoma dancing barefoot in the rain. The hallway upstairs displayed a charcoal portrait of a hospital bed, Ifeoma's back turned, cradling an invisible baby. The dining room was transformed with a piece titled Last Supper with Silence, Ife, Tunde, and an empty high chair between them. These drawings didn't just decorate, they healed. Mama Isha swore she heard laughter echo through the house once more. The birds returned to the balcony, even the roses in the garden, Ife's roses, bloomed in full after years of silence. Tunde began placing a chair near Eniola's studio door each night, not to speak, just to sit. Sometimes he brought her hot cocoa, sometimes he left her old photos of Ifeoma. He didn't push, he waited. Slowly, the space between them narrowed. One evening, she left a sketch on the chair for him. It was the two of them, sitting side by side, not touching, not smiling, but together. He wept for hours after that. Then came the storm. A whistleblower from St. Anne's leaked confidential files to a journalist. Within 48 hours, the baby swap scandal exploded across Nigeria. Billionaire's daughter found in Lagos slum, 11 years after alleged death. Hospital switched newborns to save nurse's niece. Justice for Ifeoma, baby theft or mercy. The story dominated every channel. Protesters gathered outside the ruins of St. Anne's. Old victims came forward. A public inquiry was launched. Tunde was summoned for statements. The media parked at his gates day and night. Nurse Gladys Bacco was arrested. In the viral video of her confession, she trembled under bright lights, her voice quivering as she described her choice of compassion that cost lives. Some saw her as a monster, others called her misguided. But for Tunde, there was no debate. She had taken his child. She had buried his wife with a lie, and for that, she would answer. But amid the national chaos, something extraordinary happened. People began writing to Eniola. Emails, letters, DMs. Some arrived at the gate, others came through art galleries. People who had seen her sketches online, photos leaked by journalists or shared by staff, begged her to draw them, or lost loved ones, or their own pain. A mother wrote, "My son took his life last year. Could you draw how he felt?" A man from Port Harcourt sent an envelope with a note, "This is my late wife's scarf. I haven't cried since the funeral. Can you help?" Eniola read them all. She didn't answer, but she began to draw again. Not just for herself, but for the world. Tunde watched as she worked, sometimes through the night, as if something divine guided her hand. Her gift was no longer just a mystery, it was a mission. 3 months after the scandal broke, Tunde reached out to Lagos Art House. He had a request. "I want to sponsor an exhibition," he said. "Not under my name, under hers, Eniola Falana." The curator, a woman named Moji, visited the mansion, saw the drawings, and nearly collapsed. "She's a prodigy," Moji whispered. "No, more than that. She's truth." The exhibition was scheduled for September. The title, "The Women Who Wept." Opening night came and the halls of the Lagos Art House overflowed. Celebrities, politicians, activists, and even former patients from St. Anne's arrived, eager to witness the girl who drew the soul of a nation. The lights dimmed. The walls spoke. Each painting told a story. A girl by a roadside sketching her own face into strangers' grief. A mother curled on a hospital bed screaming into her hands. A nurse's trembling fingers reaching for 2 name tags. A baby with 2 names, one erased, the other unknown. The centerpiece was a massive 4-meter canvas titled "The Blood Between Us." It showed Ifeoma reaching out from a river of tears toward a small girl who stood on a bank holding a broken frame in her hands. Behind the girl stood Tunde, arms open, waiting, unsure, hesitant, but there. No one spoke for minutes. Then the applause began, and it did not stop. Eniola stood in the corner, watching everything. Her dress was simple Ankara, her hair tied in a soft bun. She held a sketch pad in one hand, her fingers smudged with pastel dust. She didn't look nervous, just present. Tunde approached her slowly. "You did this," he said. She nodded. He opened his hand. "I'm still learning, but I want to learn with you." There was a pause. Then she reached out and took his hand. A week later, after the noise of the exhibition died down, Eniola sat alone in her studio, surrounded by blank sheets. No more commissions, no more chaos, just herself. She picked up her pencil. This time she didn't draw someone else's pain, not her mother's, not her father's, not the nurses or the crowds. She drew herself. Not as she had been, small, afraid, unseen, but as she now was, smiling, surrounded by light, whole. She titled it "Dreamer Awakened." That night, Eniola slept deeply. No dreams, no visions, only peace. For the first time, she no longer drew to understand pain. She drew because she had found joy.